I get really stressed out if I have to look after anyone else's belongings. So, about 15 years ago, I went to the US to do my bachelor's degree at Stanford University. And the Stanford campus is really large. So it's not very easy to get around only on foot. So most students usually get around by bicycle. A few really cool ones had skateboards too, but I wasn't one of them. So when my parents dropped me off to college, we paid a visit to the Stanford bike store and we bought a bike. Now, along with the bike, students also usually have this large U-shaped metal lock, and this lock is usually operated with a key. So we bought the same thing as well. However, I was deemed to perhaps be too careless and irresponsible to manage a set of keys without losing them. So we paid an extra $20 and we got a lock with a number combination instead. So I tried my best to, protest a little bit that I was half-heartedly trying to say that, hey, I'm grown up and I can handle a set of keys. But at the same time, I set the combination of that lock to the same as my ATM pin and the same as all my bags and the second half of the one password I use everywhere. So jury's still out. Anyway, so I went about life at Stanford for the next few months. I was, sleeping through half of my classes, trying to get by, scraping by with my homeworks and exams, trying to make friends. And then in the winter, I get a call from my friend Mansi. Now Mansi is a friend, so I think there's some of my school friends here, they'll know her. Mansi is a friend from school, from Bombay, and she was also studying in the US, and she happened to be visiting California at the time. So she called me and she said that, hey, if you're free for an afternoon, could I come by, could you show me around Stanford? So I was very, very delighted to do that. And in fact, I thought that the best way to show her around campus would be to do so on a bicycle. Just like visiting Amsterdam or Hampi, it just seemed like the most authentic way to see the place. So when Mansi came to Stanford, I sent an email out on my dorm email group asking if anybody would be kind enough to lend me their bicycle for a few hours. And within a few minutes, I got a reply. There was this other guy from India. His name was Praveen. He lived a few doors away from me, and he was happy to lend us his bike. He came downstairs with us to the bike parking lot, showed us where his bike was kept, gave us the key, and off we were on our Stanford tour. But about 15 seconds into this tour, I saw Mansi's bike wobbling from left to right, and then before I could say anything, she had jumped off and the bike had crashed to the floor. So we realized that maybe her skills are a bit rusty, even though she claimed that she knew how to bike. So we parked the bicycle back in the parking lot and we just did the whole tour on foot instead, which was significantly longer. And about 2 hours later, Mansi's family picked her up. She went back, and I returned to my dorm. And just before returning the bike to Praveen, I wanted to inspect it one last time just to see if there were any major scratches or anything had happened to it during the fall, because I didn't want to give him back a damaged piece. And when I went there, I noticed a few minor scratches, but nothing too much. However, what I did notice was that the bike stand was no longer functional. It seemed to have broken. It wasn't staying up in place. And I was in a bit of a pickle here, because I really did not want to be this guy that borrows something and then breaks it before giving it back. But at the same time, I had no idea how to fix this situation. So, Americans are very handy and self-sufficient. They take up weekend projects like retiling their roofs. But I'm from India. I don't know how to do these things. I had only just learned how to do my laundry. I think maybe the second week of my stay at college, I'd gone to the laundry room with my basket of laundry for the first time. And I was staring at all these machines. I was really not sure what to do, where to put my clothes, where to put the detergent, what settings to use. And I remember at that time, I was just standing there perplexed, and this gorgeous, tall, dusky, Indian-looking woman walks in, and she looks at me and she immediately deduces that I'm actually from India. She's like, "Oh, are you from India? Do you need some help?" I was like, "Yes, please." And she sorted me out, and I was extremely delighted and very grateful to her. And the next thing she said was, "Would you like to join my Bollywood dance group?" And my brain and my body and every single part of me was saying no, but I was indebted in this gratitude to her, and she was beautiful and she blinked at me, so I said but that's a story for a different time. Anyway, coming back to me with this broken bike and with no clue how to fix it, I did the thing that my Indian training taught me to do. I called a guy to fix it. So the person I called was my roommate Peter. Peter was American. Americans know how to fix things. So I called in Peter and I asked him if he could like help me out here, if he could take a look, if there was something he could do. So he came by. He tinkered around with the bicycle for a bit. He'd got a little screwdriver with him. And in like 5 minutes, he had the stand fixed. No problem at all. I was amazed. I was amazed and very thankful. And I was getting ready to, get my phone out, message Praveen, tell him he can have his bike back. But as I put my hand into my pocket, I had this sinking realization that I can't find the key anymore. I was in complete denial for a while. And I kept putting my hands back in and out of my pocket, trying other pockets, trying inside my pants. I had it couldn't be gone. Like I just couldn't accept that fact. Eventually, I even closed my eyes and tried to will the key back into existence. But Stanford has this like aura of logic around it, so that these things like this don't work either. So eventually, I was like, oh, fuck. And then Peter looked at me. He's like, what happened? So I said, Peter, I can't find the key. I must have dropped it somewhere along the way. What am I going to do? What do I tell Praveen? And normally I'm a pretty lazy guy. Like I slept through half of my classes. I did the bare minimum. But in this case, I really wanted to avoid painting myself as this careless and irresponsible person. So I had a point to prove. So I was willing to go the extra mile, do whatever it took to try to fix the situation. So off I went and did the whole Stanford tour again. And this time I was on my bike. It was a winter, so it was getting dark by 4:30 p.m. So I was on my bike this time, so it was a bit faster. I had one bike on my handlebar and I was holding my phone with a flashlight on the other hand. And Peter, good friends don't let you do stupid things alone, right? So Peter followed me and he was looking on the other side of the road. Then as the evening progressed, it got pretty dark, it started raining, and maybe about 45 minutes later, we got back home empty-handed. We were, by this point, we didn't have our jackets on, so we were cold, we were wet, and we were quite miserable. And there was still no sign of the lost keys. So I was ready to throw in the towel. So Peter went back to our room. Peter was my roommate, so he went back to our room. So I did the only reasonable thing to do at that point. I followed him back to the room and I avoided the problem. So Peter and I go back to our room and I'm just trying to procrastinate this unpleasant conversation with Praveen. And we start throwing out random ideas, really stupid ideas for how I might still be able to salvage this situation. And, these were mostly in jest. These were definitely completely in jest, but a small part of me really, really wanted to protect this image of myself as this responsible and careful adult who can look after keys. So I was actually willing to go to some absurdly stupid lengths to try to protect this image. So some of the solutions we came up with, my first approach was that, hey, I'm already avoiding this problem. Can I just avoid and delay this indefinitely? How would this work? So I thought about it. I was like, I can take this a step further. I can just turn off my phone, lock my door, and go to sleep. Problem solved. For now. I was like, what about tomorrow? Maybe I can move away. Maybe I can drop out of Stanford, go back to India. That seems slightly too extreme, but only slightly. So I started thinking of more options. The second approach, and I think I have Peter to thank for this, it was to actually go on the attack and try to get ahead of the situation. Because he had read somewhere that offense is the best form of defense. So what if I claim that I never borrowed this bicycle to start with? No, that wouldn't work. There was email evidence. What if I took the stand that I had already returned the key to Praveen, he must have lost it himself, and now I'm being framed because I'm this easy target. Okay, that seemed really aggressive. I wanted to protect my image and save face, but I wasn't a monster. That seemed a little too cruel to someone who had been kind to me. So I kept thinking some more. And then eventually we also thought of this bait and switch strategy to try to buy time. So I thought to myself that, hey, we did this whole tour in the dark. I'm willing to actually do another whole circuit of the whole campus to try to look for this key. But it's hopeless trying to do this in the dark. So if I could buy time until the morning, I could do another tour and find the key in the light of day. But how do I buy time? And here's where Peter stepped in and told me that, hey, all students have the same kind of U-lock, and all these keys look the same. you can't really distinguish one key from another. And Praveen isn't likely to use his bike until class tomorrow. So all I really needed to do was I needed to give him a key. I didn't have to give him his key. He wouldn't know till tomorrow. So that seemed like a promising plan. So the only problem was that I had a number lock. I did not have a key that I could give Praveen. And Peter stepped in again like my knight in shining armor. He said, "Hey, Nishant, you can have my spare key." I was like, "What do you mean spare key?" And here's where he explained to me that when you buy a U-lock with a key, you're actually given two keys, a primary and a backup key in case you happen to lose the first one. And then I thought to myself, hey, if Peter has his spare key, then so does Praveen. If I can get my hands onto Praveen's spare key, so that's where we came up with our final approach. And so for phase one of this approach, we had to find Peter's spare key. And this was the easiest part of the plan, but it was not as easy as you might think. We were 18 and our room looked like a tornado. So we finally did find it. It was inside a pouch, inside a bag, which was inside a bigger bag, in a box underneath Peter's bed. But we found it, and I had it in my hand. Phase one was successful. For phase two was where Peter had to step in. He had to go to Praveen's room, and on the pretext of saying that he's learned this new game of pool, and then depending on whether it was just Praveen or Praveen and his roommate present at the same time, he had to say it's a 2-player game or a 3-player game and get them out of the room. So there were two things he had to do. He had to get them to vacate their room, and as they were leaving, he had to try to make sure that the room door was unlocked. Now, I would never have been able to pull off something like this, but Peter was pretty confident, and maybe like 2-3 minutes later, I got a thumbs up from him that we are ready for phase 3. Phase 3 was the break-in, where I had to go to Praveen's room and try to find his spare key. So for phase 3, I was like super nervous. I'd never done anything like this before. I tiptoed across to Praveen's room, and I hesitated when I reached the door. I was like, can I really do this? Like, what am I doing? And this hesitation was really costly because I could have got in, but I heard footsteps down the hall and I panicked and I ran back to my room because I can't be seen going into some other student's room. And then the footsteps quieted down after a while, so I decided to give it another shot. And this time I walked super loudly. I thumped on the floor just to try to make myself feel confident. You know, if you fake it, you can make it. And I just walked into Praveen's room and slammed the door behind me. It's like, if I do this really loud, they'll presume that I know what I'm doing and I'm doing something right. And so I was in Praveen's room, and now I had probably a few minutes while this game of pool was going on to try to identify and find the spare key. If this room had looked anything like mine, I'd have been in a lot of trouble. Because it's like finding a key and covering your tracks and doing this all in the space of 2 minutes while your heart is thumping in your chest, your hands are shaking. It was no easy task. And when I walked into Praveen's room, first I saw his roommate's side, and this was worse than my room. There was food everywhere, shoes everywhere, the blanket was on the floor. But then I looked over at Praveen's side, and this was the first bit of luck I had that day. It was meticulous. There was this cupboard which was closed. There was a bed neatly made. There was a desk with only 2 things on it. There was a closed laptop and a lamp on it. And under the desk there was this set of drawers. And the top drawer was this thin drawer that screamed out to me that, hey, if I was a spare key, here's where I would be. So I went over and opened that door, the small drawer at the top, and there it was. That spare key was the solution to all my problems. All I had to do was take Praveen's spare key, put Peter's key in there, and when Praveen asked for his key back, I just had to give him the spare key. So I had made it through. But here's where I started hesitating, and I had this little moral compass came in. What am I doing? This is crazy. I've done, it's a very small mistake. Am I really going to do something this crazy to try to avoid admitting making this small mistake? But then I'd come so far, right? I was at the finish line. Was I going to abandon this plan now, and then the last few hours would be for nothing? But then really was I so devious to do this? And I thought about my chances of getting caught. I was down the line, if Praveen ever loses his key and his spare key works, he's never going to think back to this day and ever imagine that, oh, I'd like lent my bike out and that guy must have swapped out the keys. Like, that's never going to happen. It was way too devious for that. So I wasn't scared of getting caught. But as I was like looking around the room trying to think of what the right thing to do is, I noticed a few things. Underneath Praveen's bed, there was a backpack which had been like closed and probably was like ready for the next day. So Praveen was this like extremely diligent student, and on this bag was a bicycle helmet, and that's when I started thinking about who I'm really dealing with here. Like I was a student who like missed half my classes, submitted some of my homeworks. Praveen was this really diligent guy. He showed up on time for his 9 a.m. class every day. And he did this like social sin of wearing his bicycle helmet too. And look at his room, like everything, like a place for everything and everything in its place. Like, I think climate change would destroy humanity before this guy ever needs a spare key. So I wasn't damaging him in any way. And then I also looked at the key. I looked at that spare key. And I had a moment of bonding with this inanimate object. It's like, oh, poor key. It's just a backup. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Doesn't this key deserve its place in the sun too? Doesn't it deserve its time to shine and come out? Like, I would be doing this key a disservice if I didn't use it at this point. Like, this key, if not for me, this key would be just sitting here for the rest of its life and rotting away. It's such a meaningless existence. But because of me, like, it was this key's destiny to save my sorry ass. And it was my destiny to elevate this key status from backup to number one. And so I started feeling pretty good about myself. So I finally did the swap, and with this like air of self-righteousness, I like walked out knowing that I'm doing the right thing. And I went back to my room. And soon after, Peter messaged me again, like telling me they were on their way back, so I needed to get out of the room, but I was through by then anyway. So as they were coming back, I intercepted Peter and Praveen in the hallway. And I was like, hey Praveen, here's your bike key. Thank you so much. And he said, anytime. And as far as I know, Praveen lived happily ever after. It's a small end to the story. A few hours later, like Peter and I were sitting in our room. We were still amazed that this crazy plan had worked. We were in like quiet celebratory mode. And then I realized that, hey, I haven't messaged Mansi or even told her about what had happened all this while, partly because I didn't want her to like feel bad. You know, she already felt bad about dropping the bike, and partly because I didn't want her to see me as careless and irresponsible. So I never told her anything. So then I get a text from Mansi later that night. Hey Nishant, oh my God, I still have Praveen's key. Do you want me to send it back to you? Thank you.